semester. I will have a syllabus with speakers listed next week. It's still getting sorted out. We have great speakers lined up already. So our speaker tonight is David Levine from the American Sustainable Business Council. David's got a presentation to share, and David has been a teacher himself, right? So no funny business. So I'm just going to read you quickly David's bio, and then I'm going to let him take the stage. So David's the co-founder and chief executive officer of the American Sustainable Business Council. He's worked as a social entrepreneur for over 30 years, focusing on the development of whole system solutions for a more sustainable society through building strategic partnerships and broad stakeholder initiatives. Previously, he was the founding director of continuing education and public programs at the Graduate Center for CUNY. And from 1984 to 1997, David was the founder and executive director of the Learning Alliance, an independent popular education organization. So he's going to talk to us about the American Sustainable Business Council. David, thank you.
Pleasure to be here this evening, and I get to speak before there is even a list, so I'm not yet on the list. There we go. But so just a nice connection to this. Oh.
Wait, lights on or off?
Yeah, on.
What are you on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Much better. So so it's a real pleasure. I was listening to the conceptualization of this program. So it's really great to actually see the real reason why this program was created, which was to be a place for you all to gather and to do the wonderful things that I'm already hearing and I have been hearing over the last bit of time that this program is all about and that you're all about. So that's great to hear, and I've known Cheryl for quite a while. She was my downstairs neighbor, so I can get to do that to her often as well. Now you get to do that in a different way. So we'll do this really as there's a lot to present and a lot to cover. And being the first session of the season, perhaps feeling a little sense of that we should cover a lot of ground, but you should feel free to interrupt at any point in time. My kids do it all the time, so why not everyone doing it? So what I'll do is really take you through some of the work that we're doing, but also the perspective that we hold and why this is our moment. This is really a moment for business, for social entrepreneurs, and the like, to actually make some major change in this world. So the first piece is in terms of background. It was really a moment, an aha moment of realizing of how does change actually take place, and why doesn't it take place, particularly in this country, but in countries around the world. So there were a couple of factors that came to, in terms of the actual creation of what we ended up calling the American Sustainable Business Council. And it was one is that there had been an incredible growth of businesses that were operating with a different set of values. Yeah, call them social enterprise, call them green, sustainable, triple bottom line, blended value, social responsibility, all sorts of names. But that had grown, to hundreds of thousands of business in many different forms, and the business organizations that formed to represent them and the like. Two is, and recognize that in this country, that the voice of business has incredible political capital. That decisions get made. Is it good for business? Is it bad for business? Does it create jobs? Does it kill jobs? Does it kill jobs? So, the conversations of, it's good for the environment, oh, but it's bad for business, it killed jobs. It's good for our community, no, sorry, it's bad for business. Again, the determining factor is business. But the third factor we recognize is that the businesses that were making those decisions were limited to a certain set of players. They did not represent those hundreds of thousands of other businesses. They're represented by groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and some of these other trade associations that, for the most part, were representing the large multinational corporations. right? That was the third understanding. The fourth understanding was that, you know, what happens if you actually took all those businesses with values and ethics and a different way of doing their business and actually started to create them as a political force? What could happen in this country? Could it be different? And that's what we set. That was the idea. That's what we set the task to do in 2009. Proposed this idea to a number of players, and we got a number of early adopters. And the idea was to create this business voice, this presence, and this power to actually engage with the White House, engage with Congress, engage with state legislature, and to get that story out in the media. To tell these different stories, both the big vision, right, the big story, right, that changes the way that we think about everything in terms of a new economy, a just economy, a sustainable economy, and then to also use that to walk in there and basically say, every time they went, oh, I'm sorry, you know, ridding our products of hazardous chemical is still bad for business. Actually, good science is bad for business because it actually means that my toxic chemicals will now be outlawed is bad for business. We go in there and said, I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong business. You're in the wrong business now because we could do it differently. Here are real world businesses that are doing it differently. They're making it happen. And that's what we're out there doing day after day. And so these are some of the partners that we actually have. And what's interesting about what we did, or at least to us, is that this is across sectors, it's across geographies. So what you see is organization. So it's a council of business organizations and businesses that collectively are working to shift the markets and even more emphasis on changing policy to create a more just and sustainable economy. Right? That's our basic mission. And so what is done is brought together groups like Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility or the New Mexico Green Chamber of Commerce or Local First Arizona. But it's also, you know, brought together the Specialty Sleep Association. Who were they? They used to be the Waterbed Associations. Yeah. Who knew? But then, you know, it's sustainable furnishings, it's fisher people, it's agriculture, it's across these sectors. So we're actually creating an organization that is not siloed in its sectors or geographies, but is weaving together the many different voices. And our frame is that what we're looking for is the highest common ground. Not to dumb it down like a lot of business trade associations do because they can't get agreement, but we're actually asking all these organizations to bond together and to reach for this big vision of a new economy. And so what does that look like then? Well, we also understood that if it's going to be understood, it needs to have the brand names as a part of it because people don't know the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, but they do know Ben & Jerry's, they do know Stonyfield or Eileen Fisher or Dansko or these other businesses. And so those are, you know, some of our business members. Again, the focus was immediately on the organization. Why? Because that got us to scale. In 3.5, 4 years, we now represent over 200,000 businesses, right? That's the scale that we need to walk into the White House and get the meetings like we have next week with the Secretary of Labor, or to meet with the EPA administrator, or to meet with these other high-ranking officials in Congress. That gets us. But likewise, the stories that they want to hear are the individual businesses. They want to know. Tell us how, you know, how they're creating jobs and how they're doing that by actually protecting the rights of workers, or they're creating, you know, new materials through green chemistry. So those businesses become really important parts of the story that needs to get told out there in the world. That is changing the imagination to whatever extent it exists for politicians. You know, whatever ability they have. But it counters the old argument. Well, it said, you know, we were just visited by these businesses and they told us, you know, that this is not good policy. And now we go in there and they go, well, obviously there's a dialogue that has to happen. They no longer own that space anymore because anytime we get a call from Congress and we want a business to testify, we could show up. Anytime the Washington Post, New York Times calls up and says, do you have a business perspective? They, you know, when they do it to us, you know, they try to pigeonhole and say, oh, those are progressive businesses. Oh, those are just those businesses. You know, or they give us these assignments that, like the Washington Post calls up, well, the U.S. Chamber said this, but we're wondering, can you get us a business? Oh, by the way, could it be a woman business? Sure. Could it be someone from Iowa? Oh, sure. Could it be, you know, and it's like 4 layers deep before they, and we delivered that. We delivered that.
A woman from Iowa.
With a business leader, you know, that also was in, you know, a certain sector that of course was an obscure sector. But we rose to the task. So this is stuff I know you'll have for some folks. You know, Jamie Cloud from the Cloud Institute coming in, and I think she was a part of last year too. And you might have seen some of this, but just to ground it is the thing that we came to is in engaging this conversation is, you know, we've got to come in there and make a business. We're doing these questions, but from a business case. What is success? So when they say we need to build the Keystone Pipeline, this is going to create lots of jobs, and we need to frack in the United States and around the world, and they go, it creates jobs. We go, how many jobs? And let me tell you how many jobs, and the fact that usually in renewables you can create 3 times the amount of jobs that you can instead of fracking or moving ahead with Keystone. Or let's look at the economic impact of moving ahead with some of those sorts of policy and economic decisions. So these questions become really important, and you know, we just offer them as good questions to ask as you go through looking at any of the projects that you're looking at. And again, what we try to do is answer it always, yes, it's value laden, but offer it from the business perspective, and that changes how our voices get valued in any of these dialogues. You know, and you know, of course, this comes in the context of against what do we measure this, and of course, you know, mostly we look at the GDP, right? That's the reports that we're actually getting. And of course, this system of not valuing externalities, right? Not valuing the true cost of doing business, right? So when they dump waste, right? You know, when folks are unemployed because of, you know, of downsizing or moving jobs overseas, or some of the new international trade agreements that are now going to be showing up in the news, getting fast-tracked in Congress, right? Those impacts of moving jobs, whether like in the grand story, of course, is, you know, someone buys a pack of cigarettes, they smoke that pack of cigarettes, the GDP goes up, they contract cancer, they go to a doctor, the GDP goes up, they die, they get buried, the GDP goes up. But what's the quality of life? That, you know, obviously not good for the person in the coffin. So the key here is, you know, really what we measure matters, you know, and therefore getting and changing the dialogue. So we're meeting with members of Congress and the White House and state legislatures, and there's a number of states like Vermont that are actually using alternative indicators to judge how their economy is actually doing. And this is an important part of changing. If you measure the wrong things, then you're going to get the wrong answers. And that's part of what we need to change.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm not sure if you're going to cover this, but how open, like what is the response in Washington? I mean, and have you seen it shift at all?
Yeah.
So can
So
you
it's a good
describe
question.
that?
Yeah. So the great indicator for us about, you know, how bad it was, and you know, I think was we met with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is one of the largest caucus next to the Tea Party, you know, in this country, and we met with them near the beginning of this, the heads of the staff and the like, and we said, so we represent triple bottom line businesses, and they went, I'm sorry, could you slow down for a moment? What's a triple bottom line business? And we went, duh, the Congressional Progressive, the most progressive legislators in this country don't know what a triple bottom line business. This is 3.5 years ago. It's not like it was 25 years ago, you know, when, you know, Anita Roderick at the Body Shop or Ben and Jerry's were talking about social responsibility in business. So that was bad. But now we're invited to meet with them, right? Now they're calling us to their meetings. Now the National Council of Environmental Legislators did a joint grant with us to, to help to do this work together. Now, Congressman Ellison's office, the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, wants to figure out how to incentivize through tax programs, socially responsible business. How do we look at those sorts of? Is there lots of work to be done? You betcha. And certainly, our job, and I would say, look, we're a nonpartisan organization on most of the issues. It aligns more along the Democratic spectrum. But I can tell you the Democrats they don't get business. They don't understand. They have looking into their messaging for the most part. It took them a while. It took the president a while to integrate that into his messaging and understand the importance. But that's part of the shift and the role that we've actually played in all our member groups and some of the other allied organizations. They've played to say business is here, but it has many different forms. And they're getting how important that frame that I said of you got to have business at the table, but it doesn't have to be ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, Dow, DuPont, etc. Yeah? So, like we said, there are other, initiatives across the country and across the world that are trying to create alternative indicators, for, measuring what matters. Is maybe you guys have looked at indicators and there's the happiness indicator and other forms like that to look at quality of life, right? So this is another important element of the shift that's taking place. Again, putting forward, measure something different and measure a different set of values, and we'll have a better opportunity to make the shifts that we need. Yeah.
The general
progress
indicator. Who's responsible for that?
There's the website down there.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And so there are a few of these things that are out there that are sort of merging, and new ones being talked about all the time. No different than any other idea that's out there. Every time there's a new idea, there's like a lot of different takes on it, and some people need to get their name all over it, right? But this is the other part of the equation that I was talking about, is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce budget is somewhere between $205 and $250 million a year. That's what we can count, not the extra money that gets put in by their big corporation into, other slush funds, other PACs, other efforts, and the like, and the amount of money that you see being put into the elections, the amount of money that gets put into lobbying against, it was, healthcare, right, the Affordable Care Act, it was cap and trade in the climate bill, right? It was financial reform and the formation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Billions of dollars are getting poured in,
It's sort of making me nauseated.
But the important thing if you look at those three areas, we did get the Affordable Care Act. Critique it, look at it, but it did pass, and that was major. We also got financial reform in this country, and there's still spillover, there's still Wall Street run amok, there's still too big to fail, but there is also the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which didn't exist before, and folks like Elizabeth Warren, now elected, right, an incredible, powerful, legislator now, but who couldn't get confirmed, right? Who could not get confirmed as the head of the Consumer Financial Protection because of the rotten politics in Washington. So she had to run in Massachusetts against Scott Brown. So it's important to note that we won 2 out of those 3 issues, right? We lost on climate, which is a big loss. Right, but we did win on healthcare and the consumer finance and on financial reform. So it is and there are other issues that But when I say we won, I'm saying these are the issues that we've aligned with. We provided a business voice for those issues, as we do with many of the issues, but it's certainly not us alone that's out there on there. But we play that extra important role of that counter business voice, but also the vision for the way the economy can be. And this stuff, is stuff that you're familiar with, but the idea that we're holding, as a business group, we are not holding just the environmental part, we're not holding just the social, we're not just holding the economic. We really do value that triple leg stool there that says that all of these things are incredibly important, and we make that argument. And we've done our testing, and said, oh, don't use that word sustainable, that's a bad word to use, We've decided that, we draw a line in the sand, and we'll reclaim that word, we'll redefine that word, we'll give it meaning and power, and we can't give up every word that they want to, they want to undermine and they want to shoot down. So, claiming the language becomes really important. How we frame these things become really important. Your messages become really important. Changing them? Sure. We're doing work in North Carolina, they're not going to use sustainable at the moment because there's actually laws on the book against using sustainable. Or climate deniers in the Carolinas that say basically, you can't pass any legislation that mentions climate change, right? Because they're outlawing climate change. Good luck when the next storm hits. I would like to see them outlaw that next storm. But nevertheless, this is what's going on with some of our ridiculous.
I apologize.
But which is your state? The North Carolina. I would just say, watch this year.
Watch this next election.
Because now, what's the incredible stuff in North Carolina now. It's an interesting thing to watch. First of all, we'll be launching a North Carolina Business Council this year to start standing up and fighting for a North Carolina that should be. Yes, and that in part was before they started undermining. But great stuff like the Moral Mondays is a really interesting, if you've been tracking it. I mean, people standing at the court, at the state houses and the like saying, no, this is immoral, what's going on. It's very important things to, and those are the places that we're in Mississippi now, in North Carolina. We're in these places because, it's not that it's a slam dunk in New York and California, but you can't build a movement unless you're showing up everywhere in this country. And in the hard places, in coal country in Kentucky, to be talking about renewables, yeah? So, for us, is that, we get to articulate this, but we know that stuff is moving because, in part, consumers are driving this. Right, one of the campaigns that we worked on behind the scene with a bunch of allies was around chemicals all the time. But one of the things that we looked at, a couple of years ago, there was a big campaign around bisphenol A, or BPA, right? It was in the Nalgene water bottles that was showing up on top. No one knew what BPA is. I can tell you the first letter that was written by, one young woman that was working, with an advocacy organization. Said, why don't you please take those chemicals out? You don't need those chemicals in those things. It became, from that one letter where they refused, and they said, go away, little girl, she went back to the organization, who went back to other organizations, who then met with hundreds of other organizations, who then basically made BPA a household name and drove it. New businesses started up, multi-million businesses overnight, that were BPA free. Mothers were handing back their baby bottles, they were handing back all these things. The consumers drove that overnight. It was clearly articulated and coordinated behind the scenes to create that groundswell of media attention and other organizing. So change. One young woman said, this is the issue, and that chemical became a household name over time with good organizing over time. So consumers play a big role, and we go in there all the time and say, listen, our companies are doing great. Organics are grown by 14% 2 years ago. How do you argue with that in terms of job creation and the like versus, you were at 0.007 growth in these other sectors, right, in regular food production? 14% growth by organic. These are incredible. Two is we claim back innovation. They say it kills business innovation. We say no, clarity in the marketplace creates innovation, right? Good definitions create innovation, right? Tell me, if you use a sports analogy, tell me any sports that don't have rules and that there isn't great ball players in any sport that are out there excelling and are great heroes in this world, right? Why? They know the rules, but they excel within it. And we apply the same frame to business. And again, using these very common sense type frames as a way of owning it back. And then we say it opens up new world markets, right? Because others around the world are paying attention to these issues, whether it's safer chemicals or renewable energy or fair taxation. And so this is, of course, an opportunity to grow more jobs, and we can grow them as well. You no longer own that domain as well. So, you know, for us, it's then making arguments like it's important to address the full cost, the externalities, we need to reduce carbon, sustainable, you know, triple bottom line businesses are reducing carbon, they're paying living wages, they're investing in their communities, you know, they're keeping money local, you know, they're creating greater health and wellness in their community, sustainable trend. You can go through the list of what these companies are actually adding to their community, to their workers, to the country. And that's what we try to bring forward in these stories. So the rest, you know, some of what I was going to cover now is sort of the strategies that are out there for actually building a sustainable economy, and to go through these. But are there any comments before I go into the strategies? And like, yeah.
I have a question. I mean, your organization sounds like something that's like, how is this new? How does this not existed forever? And I'm just curious about like the origin story of the organization.
Yeah, well, you know, it goes something like this. The you know, I would. So it's the real quick of it, so you get the full history. I was working at the Graduate Center CUNY, like she said, a new president came in and said that the community education, the continuing education it was doing was not real education. So he said, I'm shutting down the program, even though we were moving 40,000 people a year through the program. So I moved back into working with my friends in you know, the safer chemicals, hazardous chemicals world, and addressing that, and we decided that we would create a new company. And this new company was called Green Harvest Technologies. We were busy raising funds at the point of the financial collapse. It was to produce sustainable, bio-based consumer products, like the water bottle that would be made from renewable resources as opposed to oil, petrochemical. Anyway, create that, you know, Obama and Biden get elected. One of the people in the company that we were working with gets asked to be at the White House, you know. I start setting up transition team meetings, bringing in sustainable ag, chemicals, and they call a meeting of sustainable business leaders. And 50 business leaders, you know, go to the meeting, 25 by phone, 25 in the room, you know, and everyone went in with their own idea. And I went, well, that's interesting, that's great, but you know, how does this, you know, and so my history is just looking at something and say, how do you connect all those pieces, you know, and you know, how does it make sense, and how we can actually have the power to actually do all that stuff if everyone's doing their own thing. And we get that. You need all those. You need banks. You need, you know, green workplaces. You need green chemistry. You need all. But what's the big story? What's the big opportunity? So at the meeting I said, what if we put that into one form? And that form became a letter of shared priorities for a new economy. You know, we got all these groups to sign it. We sent it out to the business, some of the business community. We got 1,300 business leaders to sign on in 2 weeks. We submitted that to the White House. And then upon submitting it, you know, I said, you know, he said we submitted it, they got it, and then I went, okay, now what? You know, yeah, so a piece of paper in Washington, D.C., yeah, that'll do a lot of good. You know? You know, bills this big, you know, it's like here's a 5-pager, yeah, that'll change the White House and Congress, sure. And basically said, you know, that was the moment. So I went, you know, when I explained earlier, those 4 factors, I just looked and said for a moment, okay, you know, what now? And it was that basically I went to, you know, 5 or 6 business, Green America, Social Venture Network, B-Lab, you know, a few other business organizations. And what if we actually created an organization that did, Well, but I got in my organization. I said, well, this would be to focus on policy. This would drive policy. And they said, well, that's great, because no one's doing that. No one's bringing us all together. That's an interesting moment. New president, maybe we should do this. Our time has come. And they said, well, we love the idea. And then they took 2 steps back. They said, go for it. And so, so it was there. And the point was, it was just another one of those moments. I went as well. So who's doing this? Someone should, of course, this makes total sense. Business gets to dominate in this country. Why isn't there a business voice that's different based on a set of values? But it wasn't there.
And this was 5 years ago?
2008. 2008 they got elected. So 2009, we went through that, right? They got inaugurated in January 1st, 2009, and we started to submit that letter 10 days later, and then by July said, let's have an organization, and sort of moved it forward.
Interesting. I have a related question.
Yeah.
Just, at what point did you feel like you had critical mass? Or, so you just described kind of like the getting started kind of piece of it. Was there a moment for you where you thought, oh, we have traction now, or
Yeah,
somebody coming on board?
I think, one of the moments is when we were joined by the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce.
Cool.
I said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is not just, people say, oh, it's Green America. Oh, it's Social Venture Network. Yeah, sure, those people. But the South Carolina Small Business, that doesn't have the word sustainable anywhere in its thing. But they were ready to stand up on fair taxation, on climate change before anyone else, and articulate a small business frame on climate in South Carolina. And when they joined, I knew that we were doing the right thing. Yeah. So anyway, those are up there on the screen, and so those are some of the ways that we think, become really, important in here. And obviously, as I said, we primarily focus on policy, but understand that we need to move the others as well. So just innovation by companies happens in a lot of different forms. Folks like Patagonia, that was their DNA,
I think the slide changed.
Oh, it did. Look at that. It did so Patagonia, right? And their release, their campaign just recently. It's not just reduce, reuse, recycle. It's don't buy it if you don't need it. I mean, that's a business saying, don't buy it if you don't need it. Or their program where they're encouraging folks, to actually trade the stuff and just not, or to fix the stuff, or to turn the old stuff into new stuff, or companies like Eileen Fisher that now have a Green Threads program, right? That now created a new culture of innovation, for how to treat mostly their women employees. It's now an ESOP, an employee-owned enterprise, where they're buying more and more of the shares of the company. And other companies get forced and shamed into it, like Johnson & Johnson. Hazardous chemicals in baby products.
Right.
I mean, excuse me? They get shamed into it, they get pushed into it. Other companies like Nike, incredible work, on chemicals and driving on safer chemicals, but they got called out, of course, on their labor practices overseas. So you have companies that immediately start, like Icestone is a company at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, recycled glass, is still at it, even, after Sandy and the like, the recovery, doing innovative work. Or Nature-Pedic. A guy walked in, he said, I have a grandchild, I went in to buy a mattress. I said, can I get a non-toxic mattress? This was 6 years ago or so. Couldn't find it. Started his company, now it's multi-million-dollar business, making, organic, non-toxic mattresses. And the interesting thing for us is not all of these companies, though, I could name the ones that do, but our members, the thing that we're asking them to do that's also different, right, is we said to them, it's great that you all are green or sustainable on the pathway to socially responsible, however you call it. But it's not enough anymore. The time has come for you to speak out. The time has come for you to tell your story. The time has come for you to stand up for policy, because you can create a great social enterprise, right? Let's not even talk the frame of business. You create a social enterprise that's about, alleviating hunger. And then U.S. Congress is sitting with the Farm Bill and cutting $10 million a year from food stamps. It's creating more hunger. So the fact that you have an innovative program to try and alleviate some hunger, and you're not speaking out, on the Farm Bill, means that we're going to have greater hunger, more of a need for your social enterprise, but less of good things going on in the world. So that's what we've asked of companies, to stand up and put their brands on the line and stand up and to be whole. Yeah.
It seems like, it feels like you're sort of in a tutorial role a little bit. Like, I'm wondering if the companies that you're working with are less savvy about policy and Washington than, say, Goldman Sachs or Exxon. I mean, these guys have been in cahoots or working with the government.
Well, the first one was right.
But I wonder, like, are you sort of like having to carry along, like you said, the Democrats, maybe not as good on business in general. Like, is there
so that was sort of an unknown task.
Yeah.
So educating the progressive legislators was an unknown task before we started. Educating advocates was an unknown task. We thought they would get it like that. They've gotten it pretty quickly, given the time frame of most change. But, most of them, still have a very anti-corporate, therefore anti-business message. And we're saying that's not, there is good business and there's not good business. And, so the difference in your messaging, your communication, it's a lot easier to raise money when you say, business, big corporations are really bad. It's another thing to be able to actually have something that you're for, that I'm for a just and sustainable economy, and I know what good business looks like, and I want to support them, I want to buy from them, I want to work with them, and the like. So that piece of work was big. Working with a lot of businesses and getting them to actually get their head out of the sand and speak out on this stuff. We struggle with that all the time. Businesses, no, we're not going to get involved. We'll just do our good thing. So it's a lot more work than we had anticipated. Being able to, but it's happened. Still, a lot of changes happen very quickly. We are sitting at almost every table that's looking at, of advocates across the country. We are invited in to sit down and say, what is the business voice? What is the business perspective on this? How can we work together? Yeah.
I was curious if you saw, there was I believe it was this past weekend, front page article in the New York Times about the different states, how they said, forget Congress in Washington. Let's go and focus on the states.
Yeah.
And now we have this huge national, essentially big experiment happening where some states are going way to the right and some are to the left. And they had an article about the Twin Cities. Literally people who live 5 miles from each other in completely different worlds now.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if that has been have you been getting down to the state level?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The answer is yes. Initially because of the scale of what needs to get tackled, we said national. But, the importance of the state work, is, so last year, we set heavily to task to actually build state organizations where they didn't. There is now a New York State Sustainable Business Council. There is this North Carolina Business Council that's going to be formed. There's an Iowa, Sustainable Business Alliance that got formed. So, where they didn't exist, we actually went in there and started to catalyze that work. They were all independent business organizations. We may carry them, fund them for a bit, but we're trying to grow them as independent business organizations. So politically, anything ever happened to us, they're still there and they could reform overnight. but the value, but also when you look at change and you look at power and you look at the, how are things going to actually change, we have totally committed ourselves to the idea that it cannot be a watch-centric, organization. Two is that a policy, the legislators are all from their states, so therefore having power bases in each of the states becomes really important. But likewise, you can actually create national policy by creating state policy, right? That's, grassroots organizing and that sort of work, was, in the domain and, well thought through by liberals and progressives years ago, taken on by conservatives and the right years later, and now it's up for grabs, but understanding that from the local school boards, to the state legislative offices. Now, so, we are trying to work on state policies that actually are innovative enough to change the dialogue nationally. But we also know that, for instance, if you move chemical policy in 6 different states, that's what drove the American Chemistry Council to the table, saying we need federal comprehensive chemical policy reform, which they refused to be at the table for.
Right.
And now they're going to fight, there's going to be meaningless chemical policy reform. But it's driving them, great companies are, pissed off, and therefore are, that are members of the American Chemistry Council say, we can't take this anymore, do something about this, because Maine passes a bill, Washington passes a bill, and it doesn't work. So you could look at a number of different issues and you could drive that sort of change, like the indicators work, move 5, 6 states, you need to do the work we're doing on Citizens United, in order to get to, overturn, the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United, right, which in essence created corporations as people. That's what that does. It was around really money in politics, but, that's what it drove. State by state, you move that towards, right, a national effort. So for us, that becomes really important. But again, for full transparency, our budget this coming year will be like $1.4 million compared to the $250 million of the chamber, let alone the American Legislative Exchange Council. We actually share the floor with Crossroads America, right? That's Carl Rowe's organization. They're down the hall. It's an interesting, the funny part that someone pointed out the other day was they came to our floor for the first time, and they were walking in the hall. They walked to the aisle, walked into the elevator, and I said, this is Crossroads America is here, right? Moving most of the conservative money in this country, and they looked, and they turned back, and they looked again and said, you know something interesting? You have glass doors, and they have solid doors with codes in the front and together. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
I'm wondering, when somebody signs up to be a member of an organization, what are they actually signing up to say we will do? Because I know working on a small roundtable or council here in New York City for composters, like that's small people, most of whom have like very similar ideas, but when it comes to trying to say something like we all agree to this, it's very difficult. Like I can't put my name on that because I'm getting funding from these guys, or I can't. And it's like 10 groups in New York City trying to compost.
Yeah.
And so, what are people actually signing on the line?
So
saying,
the four criteria that we have, is one is that you have to represent the, you have to be or represent, for the organizations you have to represent businesses or business leaders or or entrepreneurs or aspiring, you've got to be because this is a business organization. You've got to keep it clear. We'll work with everyone, but it's got to be a business organization in order to be effective in the frame that I put out before. Two is you have to agree to the overarching mission, and the overarching mission, as I said, is to drive towards a sustainable economy writ large. You just have to agree. The third, piece is just make an honest attempt to pay some dues. But the fourth one is the really important one as well, is that it's one thing for you to agree to the mission, but we need to see it in action. So we need you to take some actions throughout the year on a range of policies. Now we have an opt-in, opt-out. You don't have to agree with everything. All our member groups, you know, it's consensus driven, and all our members actually get to decide on which policies we take on and don't. And we create a set of principles from those for each of the issues. So we're not driving on what's politically expedient, but what do we in principle agree upon? That's what gets us to the table, and when it drives down to that next level beyond the big, you know, drive towards a sustainable economy. And so that opt-in, opt-out is important, but some action that you're not against us on these issues, you could have a contrary opinion, but that you're not actively fighting on, you know, on a range of issues once we've decided on those issues, and two is that you're actively organizing on some of those issues. But happy to talk with you more around organizing coalitions. Happy to help. Yeah. All right, so again, so innovation by companies is one area. Another is just, you know, the work that's going on to hold, you know, shareholders, you know, more responsible. Shareholder resolutions and the like are driving some of the environmental, social, and corporate governance work within companies to actually produce reports that are not just financial anymore. So that's another interesting play on being able to change the way business is actually done in this country. The other is really the amount of money that's pouring in. Investors are understanding, not only maybe it's value driven for them, but it's also a better investment, right? You know, if you take it, you know, the big underwriters, right, are concerned about, you know, climate change. Right? It's not good investments to invest in certain enterprises in certain places anymore. They're concerned about. So the investment dollars are going up in a renewable future because otherwise, you know, this idea that we can sit in the place of short-term profits alone is being understood as problematic. I mean, there are lots of other related movements. So whether you track it through Wall Street or you track it through movements like slow money and other efforts, or some of the other community investing efforts, there's a lot of ways that money is being moved. But this is an interesting, you know, scoreboard done by, you know, one of the early ecological economists, you know, Hazel Henderson, you know, that's worth looking into. Didn't get enough of. She's still around, and she's created this ethical media markets and this green transition scoreboard, and is trying to track this each and every year where those investments are, and it's broken down by categories. And the other piece that we sort of look at is how economic development takes place, straight up economic development in states. And what this chart is actually showing is that a lot of the states, you know, are not, they're looking to bring in, you know, Walmart. They think that's the thing that's going to drive economic development in their state. And, you know, this idea of actually investing in the companies in your state and inviting more small businesses, which, according to many studies, create up to 70% of the jobs in this country, become really important. And then what sorts of jobs are we actually creating? Right? That's an important piece for us, not just jobs, but good jobs. Mm-hmm. You know, and so when we look at this, changing the conversation at the state level or local level, municipal, around, you know, what does economic development really look like, and what are all the factors that we need to look at? How much is it going to cost us to actually bring that company in? And how much money is going to actually stay? Which brings us to this. You know, the idea of, you know, local Main Street businesses, community businesses, you know, when dollars get spent with those businesses, 3 to 4 times that amount of money stays and just circulates within the community. The baker to the butcher, you know, to the movie theater, whatever it is, as opposed to the chainsaw that sends that money out of state, you know, back to their shareholders. Yeah.
How do you convince a woman in Iowa that wants to aspire to be Walmart to join you and to be part of this movement?
So first of all, I go to our folks that formed that Iowa Business Council, You know, we've got, you know, and, you know, the first meetings, you know, we held a business summit at the White House for a sustainable economy 2 years ago. A couple of folks from Iowa showed up. They were so inspired. They went home. They got the mayor of one of their towns to sign on to this. Immediately, the state senator said, you know, from Iowa said, this is a great idea. You know, they've been mobilizing and growing, you know, like wildfire in Iowa. But the arguments are clear. It depends on, you know, who they are, what sector they're in, what they want to say. But the values piece are, you know, wouldn't you want to create a business that provides also environmental and, you know, community well-being? You know, don't you not want to be a polluter? You know, don't you want to understand that if you pay your workers better, that they'll actually stay longer, and therefore it won't cost you as much to hire the next person? Or, you know, if you're working with toxic chemicals, you know, what do you think is going to happen to you? You know, to your workers, to the folks in your community, to the kids, the school that you send your kids to. I mean, there's values that get built into the health and well-being, but we can also make the economic case around each of those values, about the money that could be won by doing the right thing, and the money that it'll cost you, the expense of doing business the wrong way. Sure, if I don't get caught. But that's a different story. That's why we drive on laws and regulations to create what we call a level playing field, you know, and the like. So we make those arguments. And, you know, if you look at this particular argument, see, you know, if you're spending your money here, you know, why would you want to bring in the Walmart if you're a local business person? Because it's going to destroy most main streets. We've got the history. You know, that's it. The hardware stores are out of business. No more. Right, in most of those towns, you know. Name the business sector and the like, they disappeared after Walmart showed up. But this is not our job alone to just look at Walmart and what's wrong. You know, it's interesting, you know, on some fronts, you know, Walmart is going to turn the chemicals industry on its head, right? You know, took out, you know, a dozen plus of the most toxic chemicals from their supply chain. Suppliers are going crazy trying because they want to sell to Walmart. It's interesting. You know, it's an interesting driver, and it's great in the context of it still exists, but in the other context of labor practices, what it does to other businesses, you know, and the like, you know, so you have to have this really robust conversation when you're looking at, when we started before, what does success actually look like? You know, we've got, you know, a lot of businesses that are totally anti-Walmart within this. But we have board members that are sitting there, you know, working with Walmart to help them do the right thing. You know, you got to choose, you know, where change can take place. We happen to believe it takes place in a lot of different places. If I can point to Walmart, you know, on chemical stuff, maybe I have a chance of passing federal chemical policy reform, you know, but maybe we need to keep pushing at Walmart. But maybe we actually need to build local economies because that's the most ideal thing in terms of the vision that we hold. So anyway, more stuff that, you know, just that, you know, local, you know, businesses, you know, drive up environmental sustainability. You can walk to work, you can bicycle to work. We have, you know, businesses like New Belgium Brewery that create incentives for folks to actually, you know, bicycle to work, you know, instead. You know, you look, it creates greater health amongst the workers. You roll all those sorts of things, all common sense sorts of frame. But again, put it in the business context, put it in the dollars saved, dollars earned, and it makes a difference. And just general community well-being. You know, I mean, all the towns and cities across the country that have been shuttered. Right? You know, big industry moved out, that's the end of the town. How do you rebuild economies in a much different way? So, you know, we talk about what are some of those strategies to advance local economic development from, you know, fair and level taxation, right? Not these big tax write-offs to the big box stores, you know, but fair taxation. And also revenue positive, investing back in our communities and in the country. Right? Investing in education. So we have a workforce. We have the new entrepreneurs investing in infrastructure, technology, transportation, and the like. Looking at land use programs, looking at how to move capital at the local level, and then building this local business power, which is a part of the frame that we hold. So these are just a few, just as a sampling of the type of organizing that needs to get done at the local level. But then, and there's a lot here, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker, but the idea of buy local movements, you know, across the country, or B2B sharing among socially responsible businesses, or local currencies like those that started in Ithaca, right? All new forms of doing business that are sort of outside, it's not Wall Street, right? Not only is it not Wall Street, but local loan funds, or small stock issues, or municipalities issuing you know, bonds to support local economies. So there's a lot of, you know, and I can make this presentation available so that you can all have it, so you don't have to get that all down. Because, but what does this mean? You know, so, you know, the sort of localist, like localvore, showed up in the dictionary 3 years ago. But this localism movement understood from a health perspective. They understand. If you know, but think of it like this: if I know who's selling me this product, if I know the farmer that's producing my food, there's a level of trust that you have. There's a level of, well, I got to do the right thing because they know me. They know where I live. They know where I work. You know, you're motivated, and I know who I'm selling to because, and I care. I can't. Is this across the board? Because this, look, you know, there's a guy in Brooklyn that runs a 99-cent store, right? You know, it's under $1. Buy anything you want. And I was having, he was there talking about good regulations, and like I said to him, so you know, the 99-cent stores are the dumping grounds for toxic products after they get outlawed elsewhere, right? They said, does that concern you? Well, you know, sort of. I said, do you want to do something about it? You know, I know some of the top folks, we can get you quality product that is safe and clean in there. And he said, well, not till it's regulated. You know, but you're in your community. I mean, these are your neighbors. I mean, don't you, you know, so it's not a slam dunk across the board, but, you know, the idea that we could be there, though, and offer not the support to make the transition, we think is really, really useful. You know, some are going to be driven by their own values, their own. Of course, I could do that. Some will need the extra support to do it. They want to do it, but they can't. So we need to figure out the policies, the incentives, tax incentives, other incentives to make it easy. The research institutions to drive on safer alternatives or whatever it is. You know, we need to be able to support that. But the growth in independent bookstores again, the growth in small farms, the growth in farmers markets, the growth in you know, when you had that 99%, you were really caught on. There was a whole Move Your Money campaign, if you saw that, right? Which was about move your money out of the Wall Street, move your money out of the big banks, and actually put it in credit unions, community banks, you know, other forms of investment where you know where your money is actually going. And it's investing in the things that you value as well. So these things are making a difference, and they are catching on. Long way to go. The other piece that's in a part of the shift that needs to take place is the certification guidelines and the criteria for this. So some of it, when policy doesn't exist, you know, the private sector creates all sorts of guidelines and the like, you know, and when they work well, like the LEED program, right, for green buildings. You know, one of the most powerful and successful certification programs out there. You know, but you have them in different sectors, on chemicals like green screens, hospitals with practice green health. There's the you know, B Lab that's doing it for sustainable business organizations. GreenWorks is what drove Walmart and the others. That's the system that they use. The US EPA has designed for the environment and works with companies to transition. It is really hot in here.
I know. Sorry. And somehow, like, that corner, I turned the spotlight off of you.
Yeah.
It's like being, yeah.
But these play a very important role. But But one point to note is that this last year that the U.S. Green Building Council came under attack by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the American Chemistry Council, because why? What catalyzed it? Does anyone know?
LEED, they launched the next version of LEED.
But there was one.
About waste materials?
It was about toxic, it was about hazardous chemicals. It was one voluntary credit to move away from hazardous chemicals, the American Chemistry. You know, I thought this was going to be just about energy. Now that you're talking about hazardous chemicals, this is all wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. Stop doing this. They said, no, we have a process. It's our membership driven. It's drug. So, we had to step up, and they're still under attack. To this, one of the most used certification system, most respected in the world, because these things are having traction, right? And they make a difference. So, interesting stuff around, but value in transforming markets and the like. The other, is really the new business models that are actually growing. This is really talking about, the importance of ownership. In this country, when you look at, in some companies, the highest paid employee, the CEOs, making multi-millions of dollars, to the lowest paid workers just barely making minimum wage or not making minimum wage in certain companies. So there's a big movement in this country and around the world, and some of it inspired by the work in the Basque region of Spain, Mondragon. I don't know if you've come across that, but fascinating project. But it's been brought here and it's been rejiggered, and so what you have is things like, one of the earlier players in this is Evergreen in Cleveland, is a great model to look at. But also there's a project in the South Bronx that's getting underway, the Bronx Community Development Initiative. That's again a series of worker cooperatives that they tie themselves to what they call anchor institution, like hospitals, university, because that's, will ensure you have some good purchasing taking place, and there's you sort of garner this commitment to support back the community and good jobs, and through these worker cooperatives. There's also now a union model as well that the steel workers have helped to move through. And and it's in about 10 cities and it's growing. So this idea of the old union model of the workers working for the big company and they have unionized. This is workers, right? Union members now becoming owners in the initiative. An interesting twist. When you look at, for those that look at labor movement, and what's happening to the attacks on the labor movement, or the decline in membership, or the like. An interesting way of how do you reclaim the economy? How do you deal with wealth? And how do you enable a middle class to reemerge in this country? And all those types of questions. It's an interesting model. Pittsburgh, Ohio, Bronx, the South Bronx, interesting models across the country. The other piece that we pay a lot of attention to is just regulation and sort of the cost of regulations, on businesses. Don't need to spend a lot of time, but, obviously, if you're not dealing with stuff that's breaking the law, right, then, you're a much smarter business. But, of course, that's why they want to undermine the law. I was starting to tell you the story before of, the styrene industry, right? Styrene. There's a report on carcinogens that came out a couple of years ago, where the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences puts out this report collecting all the scientific data, and styrene was named as a presumed carcinogen. They lobbied their members of Congress, lobbied with money, right? Made contributions. They, in essence, bought themselves a congressional hearing. We got a call and said, could you show up? And so we brought in a business leader that's making non-toxic renewable chemicals. But the styrene industry got this hearing. Why? Because they said, I'm sorry, but this science is bad for business. So you should basically squash this report on carcinogens.
Can't be that open. They can be that open about it. Just say, they don't even have to say, like, actually it's wrong, or we have this other science that disputes it. They can actually just say it's bad for our business and you need to get rid of it.
That's pretty typical, right?
Well, I mean, look at the
If it's bad
climate,
for business, then we don't do it.
That's right. So, look, we sat in with legislators that basically said, we don't care what the facts are. This is what we want to believe. So, but the idea of science, science and facts is being, that's a liberal conception. Is it's an interesting thing to. So, yes, they're still buying scientists. We were at a hearing where Waxman from California, was a hearing about something else, and Waxman walked in and said, "You're the same guy that I just found out you got paid $50,000 by the audit, and you testified against our cap and trade bill, 3 years ago."
You remember.
Oh yeah, and Henry Waxman is loud enough to let you know. But it's a fact. But we went in there and basically said, with this company, I'm sorry, but like I said before, you're in the wrong business. We could actually make the same stuff that styrene is and does with non-toxic materials. So get out of the way. We could do this and protect human health. So for us, the main, as I said, the main piece is really policy. And so here are the arguments that we make, to both the sympathetic and the unsympathetic, is just look. It levels the playing field. It defines the space. So look at whatever the issue is. It will help to create clarity and level the playing field. It will help to expand the markets for safer products. You create that clarity, the public now has greater trust in this. Right? They assume that the products on the shelves are safe. But their products, cosmetics is not, there's no oversight for cosmetics. Right? We're trying to pass the Safe Cosmetics Act. So for those of you using cosmetics, there's a thing called Skin Deep database. I would check that out as well from the Environmental Working Group and the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. But, it's just not there. That's the role of government. In business, business has a role, government has a role, the public has a role. These things have gotten a little confused with a little help from some not of my friends out there. And so the idea is, we talked about reducing costs, liability. If you're dealing with the wrong stuff, you're more likely to be subject to liability cases, which is, of course, why they want to take over courts, why they want to move in that direction as well. Yeah.
But there's an understanding. I mean, there are many times where they know what they go ahead and make a business decision.
That's right.
That even if we get sued X amount of times, we're still going to be better off.
That's right.
Money-wise.
That's right.
So what do you do with that? That's just like.
So one is you build up the sets of businesses that are doing the right thing, and you make it clearly transparent, and people move their business from those businesses, and businesses move those business from that business. So you build up the new economy. That's of extreme importance, and how we figure out how to support that, and one of the policies to support that is of extreme importance. Two is, there's movements to look at removing, someone's corporate charter, a business's corporate charter. You've done, those were supposed to, look at the history of corporate charters, and you'll see those were supposed to be granted, right? And they could be reviewed by the state, and they could be taken away. That's why we also are working with B-Lab to create a new corporate form, the Benefit Corporation. It's now passed in about 19 states. So it doesn't do away with the other corporate forms, but it creates this idea that you're beholden to stakeholders, not just shareholders, right? And there's a transparency and a commitment to social and environmental, as well as fiduciary financial responsibilities. So that's another part of the movement. And the third is just make the fines and the penalties actually mean something. So there's a number of strategies afoot to try and do that, and and you need all of them to be in play at one time. So this part of treating employees well, is better for business. The idea of creating greater trust with the consumers is going to drive more business to your company. The idea of transparency and the like, again, creating greater prosperity throughout the supply chain, and this idea of being able to articulate that across the world becomes really important, right? So the other piece that became really important in the formation of the council was the idea that we weren't going to work on one issue alone. So this idea, when you look at the economy, and these are just a few of the issues, so, whether it's, creating access to capital for the right sorts of businesses, making it in America, looking at the trade agreements that are coming down, and the impact that's going to have on local communities, on environmental, regulations, on any number of different aspects of good business, sustainable agriculture and GMOs. So I'll go through a few of these, but for us, it's really the connection between all of those. You have to go into depth on these and drive policy in each of these areas, but if you don't understand the connection between these, we think we're missing the boat. And you'll make progress in one area, you'll lose in another area, right? So, as I said, good business equals good workplace for us. So from the culture to democracy in the workplace to safe and healthy conditions. So we run a campaign, Businesses for Fair Minimum Wage. That's driving national minimum wage, driving state-based and local minimum wage, or paid sick leave. Also, the idea of creating safe workplaces free of toxic chemicals, as I talked about. So the idea of a good workplace is being good for business is a set of policies that we're trying to actually drive, as we're trying to also encourage good behavior in the workplace itself. I talked about, chemical policy that we're trying to drive at the state level, but also at the national level. The bill that we had was the Toxic Substance Control Act was passed in 1976 and has done squat in terms of regulating chemicals. They looked at 5 chemicals. They couldn't even get asbestos off the marketplace, even with all the proven, so even science and life. So we've now just launched, as a couple of weeks ago, after years of doing this, we came up with a new formulation, how to get more traction, and we created with 7th Generation at the lead, Companies for Safer Chemicals. So it's Eileen Fisher, Stonyfield, Aubrey, Patagonia, Naturepedia, and more joining every day to be this out front business voice on chemical policy. Drive on green chemistry, safer chemicals, drive on getting rid of hazardous chemicals, protecting communities, protecting the most vulnerable. So when you look at environmental justice or the impact on children or the like, this is a big issue, but having a business frame and proving you can create safer products and materials through these companies is a really important place. The day we launched, we immediately got called by Congress and said, this is incredible. We've got to talk. We're negotiating this bill. We need you guys at the table. Right? They weren't there. We didn't know there was such a thing as businesses that would come together and stand up. We know there were good companies doing the right thing, but you guys are willing to, we're going to call you when we need someone to testify. It wasn't there. They didn't know who to call. On taxes and revenue, not a typical sustainability frame, but how are we going to pay for getting to a sustainable economy? This tax system, so you hear about tax havens, right? Billions of dollars hidden overseas by the very companies, that purport to be good corporate citizens of this country, hiding their profits overseas, don't pay any taxes. How are you gonna invest back in this country? Why is there no money to invest in schools? In new rail systems, you name it. So working on ending tax haven abuse, and how we fund the new economy and a fair and level playing field again, are some of the issues that we look at. Sustainable agriculture, how to rebuild, and save local farms, creating new opportunities for farmers and ranchers, and dealing with issues like genetically modified organisms and sort of even the right to know that it's in there, right? Big fights, right? New York State is next, right? In terms of this fight, but we lost in California, lost in Washington State, and guess what? It was Monsanto. Put millions and millions of dollars every day, pushing on this. And interesting argument. They said the price, so you be scared, public, because your milk price is going to go up. These companies are trying to, all these people are scaring you into this. It's going to cost. You won't be able to afford milk for your babies. That's what they did. Well, they did. That's the crazy. And poured millions of dollars into this. So rising up business voices and saying, no, that's not the way it's going to be becomes really important. Likewise, this idea, look, the idea of politics and money in politics it's a disaster in this country, and it's only gotten worse. So this idea that we could debate the ideas when elections are bought, at the level that they're being bought, through the PACs, through this idea that there could be unlimited, unknown contributions, and this was so at the anniversary, of the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United, we launched Businesses for Democracy. And the idea being to say, first of all, that corporations are not people, that we don't have, the Bill of Rights was not written for companies, the Constitution was not written for companies, there's corporate charters and all. So let's get it clear. Ben and Jerry's great, the two guys that, Ben and Jerry, and they said, I'm Ben, he says, I'm Jerry, we're people, but Ben and Jerry's is a company, that's not a person. It makes ice cream, I like ice cream, but no, that's a company. Let's get, so this idea of campaign finance, transparency with, there's a lot of way, all the way to a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United is where we step in. Because, we can't go in there and make the case for any of these things if all the politicians of Boyle are scared because of the amount of money that's going to be dropped. We know we can fight these decisions on taxes. We took on the campaign Win America that wanted to bring back that tax haven money. That was the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It was major corporations. Along with the advocates, we stepped up as a business voice, and we stopped them from bringing back, this idea that they get a break for bringing back the money into this country and paying a much lower tax fee than everybody else has to pay as a favor to the country. And the other piece, is really, as I mentioned, is how do we actually build the new economy? So we played a role in, some of our leaders helped to write the original concepts around crowdfunding, right? A lot of the donation-based crowdfunding, Indiegogo, and a lot of those other campaigns. But this was a way now of sort of making it easier for those of you who understand investment, the idea that, to invest you have to have a certain amount of money, you have to go through a lot of paperwork, to be an accredited investor, and this was to set a lower bar, but we stepped in there to ensure that there were actually rules and regulation. There was a bill that basically said, let's hand this over to Wall Street, don't worry. Worry. And so we were able to pass the bill, as a part of the American Jobs Act that had some good rules to the road, and the SEC now has garnered some roles. We didn't get everything that we wanted in the final bill. We wanted it really to be local, that you could do, this just at the $100 level, the $250. So, what it would cost, a family to go out to Disney, less money than going to Disneyland, right? But the idea that they could invest in a business in their local neighborhood. So we're going to see some of that, and we're actually building a crowdfunding portal that will allow all our member groups to start raising investments for their businesses and their organizations in order to drive. So moving the money, again, off of Wall Street, back in through our business organizations that are committed to a more just, sustainable economy. So all that is a part of what we're trying to do, and sort of you name the issue, and we're trying to be there where we can in some form or fashion. Again, so for us, we say, take into account this idea that there's a value to the business community actually stepping up and being a part of creating this change. Call it business, call it social entrepreneurs, call it a slideshow that goes amok. The idea of put your money where your values are aligned. Invest in, whether it's local business or value-aligned businesses, invest in those businesses, encourage others to do that. You know, move the public, your circles of public, you know, to actually, you know, be these sorts of businesses, connect with these sorts of businesses, buy from these sorts of businesses, drive on the policies that will support these sorts of businesses. And again, then engage and motivate and put the pressure on elected officials, improve the rules, improve the regulations, but also create incentives and create the opportunities to sort of drive and be a positive. We just, I think I could say, it looks like we've been, the New York City Economic Development Corporation we just are signing a contract with them to incentivize local businesses to provide more benefits to low-wage workers. And so what we're going to do is create an aggregated purchasing network that will allow businesses to buy together, that commit to providing a greater workplace, to buy together, to save money, and then to use B-Lab criteria about measuring themselves and providing education and support in order to create the incentives to do the right thing, right? And so this idea of incentives, you know, alongside the rules and the regulation, again, is a very important tool. And it's really this idea, we got to keep getting this story out in the media so everyone knows that's important still. You know, and and these stories, you know, have resonance. And if they're not told, then no one knows they exist. Yeah, no one knows in business or this opportunity to create a new economy exists. And then, you know, we are one forum, you know, again, that's aggregating all these many voices and players across the country to actually work from the business end to sort of create this new economy. So whatever role we can play in helping you to do the wonderful things that you're going to go out and keep doing, is we'd be happy to try and figure out a way to help.
Thank you.